Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. Welcome to the 6 o'clock club. That's an unofficial club where you get nothing but bragging rights for showing up in the 6 o'clock hour of the program each and every day. Thank you for being part of it. You can now brag to your friends that you are a member officially of the 6 o'clock club. Welcome to the program for this Tuesday. A little bit of different today. We're going to start off as usual with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. And we're going to be doing the weekly top three. And then in hour two, where normally I would do some recap and then we finish up with Chris Story. Today, instead, we're going to be joined by gubernatorial candidate Bernadette Wilson, who's going to be joining us in hour two for the full hour. And we're going to talk a lot about budgets and leadership and the permanent fund. And all different. It's going to be a rousing discussion in hour two today. Chris will be joining us tomorrow in hour one to make up for it, because I just can't go a day. I just can't go a day without a week without having Chris Story in here. We'll definitely probably need it after it's all said and done. Before we get started, go too far along the road here. Let me give you the normal morning winter weather winter storm warnings and high wind warnings and everything else. Fairbanks still. Oof, man. They've had a bunch of snow up in the interior. They're saying that this will go on until at least tomorrow morning. Travel continues to be difficult. Westerly winds strengthen throughout the Tanana Valley, which could lead to blowing snow as well, and increased snow on frozen rivers and streams. Pretty much the whole town is shut down. According to the KTUU, the Fairbanks North Star Borough has officially suspended all borough services today as the winter storm continues. All services, including the Max Transit bus, the Van Trans, all the parks and rec facilities like the pools and the ice rinks will be closed. All the borough libraries are going to be closed. The schools are closed yet again today. In Fairbanks. So that's a thing. And yeah, I'm assuming you're not getting your trash service for the city either, because it's probably, cold and bleak and dark. Also, high wind warning for the Kenai Peninsula in the Seward area. Winds up to 65 miles an hour, few isolated gusts up to 75. Wind chills dropping to 25 below in the Seward and vicinity. That's through tonight. It's tonight to midnight on Wednesday. Temperatures could reach 25 below or colder, and they're gonna rapidly strengthen this afternoon and then peak tonight through Wednesday. And so current temperature outside the old studio here is 33 degrees, so we're not too worried about it right here. But in the Seward area, ooh baby. All right, so let's get to it, shall we? I did all my housekeeping. Let's get on down to it and start the ball rolling. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, joins us this morning to talk about a little bit of everything. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
Michael, I'm doing great today. You mean winter's not over yet?
I told him, I said yesterday, it was like, I looked in the mirror and I said, sucker, you knew it was coming. That was a false spring, all that stuff that was happening and everything. So yeah, no, winter's not quite over yet. It's all good. It's all good.
Those are tough temperatures.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. It's what happens when you have clean living. That's all I'm saying. 33 degrees is when you have clean living. Brad, let's get down to it because, boy, I'll tell you what, the stuff that's going on down in Juneau is just, man, it's making my head spin. All the mental gymnastics that are required for some of the behavior down in Juneau right now is pretty crazy. Let's start off with the Senate Resources Committee. And this massive overreach where, and on the one hand, they saw the governor's revenue bill and they were like, dead on arrival. But let's take this part of it and let's stretch this out into infinity. Give me the deets here.
Yeah. So there's no question that oil taxes need to be adjusted, need to be changed, need to be reformed. Absolutely no question about that. When you look forward for the next 10 years, the production tax, which traditionally, at least over the first decade of SB 21, produced about 7% of gross oil revenues, gross wellhead oil revenues, produced about 7% take for the state. When you look over, when you compare that to the upcoming decade and look at the projection that Department of Revenue has made, that's down to less than 2%. By the end of the 10-year period. And that's horribly deficient against any standard, judging it against other states, judging it against what oil companies can stand, judging it against where Alaska was during the first decade of ACES or first decade of SB 21, judging it against where Alaska was before ACES, before the overreach of ACES. No question that oil taxes need to be reformed. And the legislature needs to dig in and do the hard work to do that. What Senate Resources did instead, by substituting in a 17% gross production tax in place of the governor's proposed fairly carefully thought out revenue plan, by substituting in 17%, is a horrible overreach. I mean, it would that at that level, gross production taxes would exceed gross production taxes in any other state in the U.S. and added to royalty and added to the other taxes that we have, property taxes, corporate income tax, and royalties. It would produce a level of take that's substantially higher than what you find in most other countries. So the 17% is as much a foolish proposal as the current SB 21 regime that's producing less than 2% by the end of the 10-year period. It is as much an overreach as the current oil tax regime is an underreach. I don't know what Senate Resources was trying to do. I don't know what Giesel and Wielechowski were trying to do. In some sense, it's counterproductive. If they were truly trying to reform oil taxes, it was counterproductive in the sense that it's like a poison pill. I mean, nobody should adopt, and hopefully nobody will adopt a 17% gross production tax. And so by putting that out there as their proposed solution, they essentially put out something that wouldn't and shouldn't be adopted, and essentially made it into a poison pill that nobody will touch. They could have done the hard work. I mean, modeling this stuff is not all that difficult. I've done it in some of the columns. I've done most of it in some of the columns I've written in the Alaska landmine. You can look at levels of take in the last decade of SB 21, which is a good standard to start with. You can look at the level of take in the last decade or the first decade of SB 21, and see what you have to do, see what adjustments you have to make in the oil tax code going forward to match that level of take that you had in the first level. If you want to go back to what we had before ACES, in the old system, the old gross production tax system we had before ACES, you can model that. You can see how you need to adjust production taxes to go back to that level. So it's not all that hard to do. And the fact that they didn't do it and the fact that they overreached by going to 17% is a real disappointment. And frankly, some indication that I don't think they're serious about looking at the changes necessary to gross production taxes.
How much of this do you think is just the grinding axe that Wielechowski has? I mean, he's been very much so. I mean, he's the guy that's been quoted as saying we're underselling our own take by $1 billion. We're he's constantly been hammering on this for years. And while you and I both agree that there is money on the table, there's got to be a balance there, right, to manage investment and everything else.
Yeah, exactly right, Michael. I mean, what we had under ACES, you can look at what we had under ACES by looking at the tax levels and looking at the resulting impact on producer economics, and then looking at the investment levels. We had, while the world from roughly 2010 up to 2014, while the world was having a huge jump in investment in oil projects worldwide, Alaska was going down in terms of investment. And you can tie that directly to the economics that ACES created. So we needed an adjustment in 2014. Now, that adjustment, I think, was good and was solid for the first decade of SB 21. It resulted in a take of about 7% of gross revenues. And that's a fairly standard level. If you look at the severance tax levels that are on the gross throughout the U.S. and throughout the world, 7% is a pretty standard number. And so we were roughly following along with that number in the first decade. But in the second decade of SB 21, because of the way all of the credits and all of the deductions start piling on top of each other in the environment as we've gone into the second decade, we're plunging. Oil production taxes are plunging. And Wielechowski's right to raise that issue, and he's right to focus on that issue. But he's gone way too far. It's like he's not serious about it. It's like he wants to do, messaging about, we need to change it. We need to change it in a dramatic way, without being serious in trying to change it in a way that's productive. I mean, he talks about Hammond. He talked about, getting back to the Hammond standard. Well, there's a couple of things that's wrong with his view of adding 17.5 to 12.5 to get the 12.5 royalty to get to 30%. One, Hammond's third was on the net. It wasn't on the gross. And so when you try to get to a third on the gross, you're way overreaching on the net. Net is after costs. And the other thing is he ignores the impact. Alaska collects revenues from producers in 4 different ways. We do it through royalties, through the production tax, through the corporate income tax, which has its own problems that need to be dealt with. But we still collect some revenues through corporate income tax and through statewide property tax and oil property tax. And those 4 add up to a certain level of revenue. When you try to get to the Hammond's third, misstating the third as being on the gross, when you try to get to the Hammond's third by just using 2 of those and ignore the other 2, you're way overreaching. So Bill just comes across as unserious at a time when we need serious tax reform, at a time when we do need tax reform. And there are ways to do that tax reform in a way that would produce good numbers, solid numbers, both for the state and for the producers. And there's ways to go about it. And, there's a fairly clear path to how you get there, to the reforms you need to make. At a time when we need that serious tax reform, Bill's being unserious about it. And Giesel joined in. And Clayman and others that voted for that bill out of Senate resources. Shoving it off on Senate Finance at a time when Senate Finance has a whole lot of other things to do is also unserious. I mean, Senate resources is the place where oil tax reform is always started. It's started either in resources on the House side or resources on the Senate side. And they've done the hard work of going in, getting the testimony, developing the numbers, looking at the projections, and putting together a fairly solid case of how you do oil tax reform. For them to just, to go to that number and then just throw it off to Senate Finance is unserious. Is an unserious way of legislating at a time that we need serious legislating.
So what's your speculation here as to why it's gone down like this? Because again, this was very rushed. I mean, usually these things take a long time to pencil out because the tax structures are pretty complex and everything else. And I mean, they banged this thing out in an afternoon kind of thing. You know what I mean? It was like pretty quick. So is this all political theater? Is this performative just for him to be able to beat his chest on election season and say, look, I tried to tax the oil companies? Or is he, I mean, what do you think? Are they trying to just start the conversation? Because I would have thought that if they were going to start the conversation, they would have done it in the committee and held it in the committee and made a lot more hay about it.
The takeaway I have from it is that Wielkowski's counted the votes, and this could be wrong, but the takeaway I have is that Wielkowski's counted the votes aren't there for reform. And so what he's done instead was decide to go for headlines, decide to, go for this exaggerated number, try to tie himself to Hammond in the wrong way, and try to, grab headlines about he's a crusader, and use the situation to his own personal political advantage instead of trying to be serious about it. And that would be consistent with the thought process that I'm not going to get the votes anyway. I'm not going to get reform anyway. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, grab headlines, and I'm going to, go on the attack and try to, make hay out of this, because I'm not going to be able to get reform anyway. It's not good legislating. I mean, even if you didn't think you were going to get it through this year, right? This process takes a long time to sort of grind through the numbers, grind through the testimony, put together a thoughtful package, and unlikely to pass in the first session where you're doing that, but it lays the groundwork for subsequent sessions that you've sort of come in then with all that stuff done. You can really start, trying to put the votes together. And he's foregone, the committee has foregone that opportunity in this situation, just sort of, thrown their hands up the air and said, give me some headlines and move on.
Political theater at its finest. All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, number 2 of the weekly top 3, dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break. Brad Keithley, our guest. So what is the solution here, Brad? What should if the number's not 17, or there's other components to it that should be brought into play, in a perfect world where Brad Keithley was emperor for a day, what would this look like? What would we be talking about?
They had a couple of pieces right in the committee hearing, I think before the one where they came up with 17. One was to harden the floor. One of the problems that we've got in the current oil tax structure is we've got a so-called 4% minimum, 4% of the gross minimum on the oil tax. And that's supposed to sort of act as a floor on how far oil production taxes can drop due to as a result of the other provisions of SB 21. The problem with that floor is it doesn't always apply. And so as we've talked about on previous shows, there is one category of production, new production, that qualifies for what's called the gross value reduction, GVR provisions of SB 21. And that grows, those volumes grow from 3% to like 50%, over 50% by the end of the 10-year period, volumes that qualify for GVR. And GVR has a credit provision to it that goes below the floor. The floor doesn't apply to it. And so that's what's driving down the production tax levels down to, less than 2% over the 10-year period.
Right.
They talked about hardening the floor and not allowing the GVR credits to go below the floor, and also resetting the floor at 6%. Both of those would be significant fail safes in SB 21. If the rest of SB 21 is doing weird things, those floors would do a lot to make sure that the state continues to get its fair share of the gross wellhead revenue provisions. So they were close when they were talking about those, and then they just threw those out the window and went to the 17% of gross approach. So they had elements. It looked like to me like they had elements that they could start piecing together a good reform package, and then they didn't.
So the GVR and the floor is the problem. That's why we have more production but less revenue coming in, less taxes coming in, because the GVR and the floor are not working together in the way that they should.
Yeah.
Where if those were fixed, then we'd have more production, and more production would lead inevitably to more tax revenue.
Yeah, I did a column a few weeks back that looked at what if we had a 6% or a 6.75%, which is what we averaged during the first decade of SB 21, 6.75% of gross. What if we had a floor at that level, and the increase in production tax revenues would be at about the $400 to $500 to $600 million level that we've always talked about, that we're running deficient right now. So that's about right. That's about the right way to approach it. Let SB 21 do whatever the heck it's doing with all the other provisions, but harden that floor and set the floor at a rate, at a level that is reflective of what happens in other states and reflective of what happened during the first decade of SB 21. Those simple steps would do a lot to fix the problems we're having with oil production taxes.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. You can find him at ak4sb.com. And of course, you can always go out and argue with him on Twitter. I'm always seeing him on Twitter or X, arguing with somebody about something. It's like, him and Todd Smolden. Those are my favorite arguments, by the way. Just say. All right, Brad. Well, let's get ready for it here. We're 40 seconds out. We're about to jump into number 2 and get ready to go. I mean, have you been watching all the other madness that's going on in the legislature? I mean, outside of your weekly top 3, is this just not one of the nuttiest sessions you've seen in a while?
Yeah, I think the term "not serious" is sort of applies generally across the board.
Yeah,
they're just doing things that aren't serious legislating.
Well, it's all performative at this point. It's an election year, and they're doing everything they can to get the headlines to be able to pat themselves on the back later on during the campaign. That's what it feels like to me. Very performative, the whole thing. All right, here we go. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Let's do it.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay, we're continuing now. Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Again, ak4sb.com. That's where you find him. Continuing on for the weekly top 3. We just finished up with number 1. Number 2, exactly how regressive is the income taxes we've been talking about here? Because there's all kinds of different tax revenue measures and everything else. But one of them is the quote unquote income tax that's focused, Brad says, on locking in a long-term PFD cut. Brad?
Well, this is sort of the continuation of we're not having serious legislation this session, or we're having performative arts this session. Elise Galvin has a bill that has stirred up a lot of people. It is a proposed education tax, what she calls an education tax. But since you can't dedicate funds, a tax to raise money for education, she says. But since you can't dedicate funds, it's not really that. It's to raise revenue that might be used for K through 12, but might be used for other things as well. And it's just stirred up all sorts of reactions, both from the conservative side and from the progressive side. The progressives say, yeah, it's about time we had that income tax. conservatives, claiming it's the end of the world to have a progressive income tax. What's really interesting about it is it's not serious. I mean, so we have about a $1.5 billion deficit under current law. When you count the PFD at current law, we have about a $1.5 billion deficit over the next 10 years. Some weeks it's higher than that. The projection is higher than that. Some weeks it's lower, depending upon where oil prices are going. But let's just say it's a $1.5 billion deficit. Elise Galvin's bill raises $330 million, about 20%, about a fifth of the size of the deficit. It's gotten all this reaction that people think, oh, it's going to raise all of this money. It's going to wipe out the deficit. We're going to solve it in a way that progressives like. It doesn't do that. Raises about a 20th, about 20% of the overall deficit over the next 10 years. So what does she think is going to close the rest of the deficit? PFD cuts. So this revenue that she's proposing to raise is 20% coming from this progressive income tax. The other 80% of it is coming from PFD cuts, additional continuing PFD cuts. And the bill's designed in a way to lock in those PFD cuts, because once you've spent all this energy and you spent all this legislative angst to go through and enact a progressive tax, you're not going to go in and enact another tax. Everybody's going to say, top 20% included, everybody's going to say, we've had our tax.
Right.
Now the rest of it has to come from someplace else. And the rest of it in the design of what she's talked about, the rest of it comes from PFD cuts. So overall, this so-called progressive income tax is hugely regressive, because you've got to combine the effect of the little bit of progressive income tax at the front end with the huge amount of continued PFD cuts, highly regressive PFD cuts at the back end to make the damn thing balance. And the net result is even more regressive. The net result of those two things is even more regressive than the governor's proposed sales tax, which everybody claims is hugely regressive and a bad thing. So the net result of this progressive income tax that Elise Galvin's talked about and other people have jumped on board with is to produce a total fiscal package, including the back end PFD cuts that you have to have added to it, is to produce a solution that is more regressive than the governor's approach. Not quite as regressive as doing it all through PFD cuts,
right?
But the 20% coming from the income tax isn't nearly enough to shave down the regressivity in a way that approaches what's going on with sales taxes. So it's performance. It's not an attempt to seriously resolve Alaska's overall budget situation. It's not an attempt to really be fair to middle and lower income Alaska families, although she claims it, because the proposed tax doesn't kick in until 150,000 single taxpayer, 300,000 two taxpayer, doesn't kick in until the high levels. She claims it's a burden. She's trying to shift the burden to higher income taxpayers. But when you look at the overall effect of the little that's being raised through the income tax portion, and then the remainder that has to be raised through additional PFD cuts, it is shifting the burden, permanently shifting the burden to middle and lower income Alaska families.
As you look at this, and again, it seems like what these legislators are favoring more and more are these super convoluted ways of doing things. I mean, we look at Kathy Giesel, the education bill that Zach Fields and Elise Galvin and Andrew Gray, the head tax up to a certain amount, beyond underneath a certain amount. If you make over this much money, then you spend. If you make over this much money, then you got to spend another additional $2,000. Now, Elise Galvin's got her own progressive income tax, and instead of just a flat sales tax or a flat tax, one of the two, why do we have to make it so convoluted? Unless, as you said, it's a backdoor way of kind of semi-codifying these cuts, because once they've done all the pain and got, like you said, they won't increase it. There won't be any more talk about taxes because, hey, we just had a tax thing last year. We'll just keep taking the PFD.
Yeah, it's a hide the ball trick. I mean, in a way, it's to claim one thing, to claim that you're being progressive, to claim that you're going to tag high income Alaska families as bearing the burden of this, when in fact you're really shifting the burden to middle and lower income Alaska families. They're trying to say we're progressive. We're not like that bad governor who wants a sales tax, who wants a regressive sales tax. We're progressives. We want this. We want an income tax that is, focused on high income families. Trying to hide the ball of that. What they're really doing is by combining that with PFD cuts, which they have to do to close the deficit. By combining with PFD cuts, they're resulting in a worse overall impact on Alaska families and the Alaska economy than the governor's proposed straightforward sales tax. There are different ways to do the governor's sales tax that make it a little bit better or a little bit worse. There's different ways to do a flat income tax that ICER recently analyzed. There's different ways to do that to make it a little bit better or a little bit worse. And you can focus on those to solve the overall problem. But what a Galvin's doing is trying to, again, like Wielechowski, trying to grab headlines by saying, look, I'm a progressive. I'm going to, have this this income tax applicable only to high income Alaska families. I'm a progressive, when in fact, she's not doing anything. I mean, she's hurting middle and lower income Alaska families more than the governor's bad sales tax proposes to do.
Well, and there's so much hypocrisy going on in here, even in this article talking about the new revenue that we were just talking about in the last segment. Their justification for taking the sales tax from the bill dismissed the idea due to what they said was overwhelming opposition to a revenue measure that would disproportionately affect lower income Alaskans. And again, they just sat through an ICER report that said what? Taking the PFD has the largest adverse impact on the Alaska economy and Alaska families, specifically those in the lower income. I mean, there's just so much. Again, I'm agreeing with you that this is, again, more about performative, not serious people just looking to grab headlines to get them through the next elections. This is what Rob Myers has been talking about, how the structures are in place and the incentives are in place for them to do nothing but just run to the next election cycle. That's what this is about.
Yeah. And Galvin, I mean, so the press is falling for it hook, line, and sinker too. That piece you just read about, the regressivity of the governor's sales tax, certainly not as regressive as PFD cuts, and not as regressive even once you put the two pieces together, not as regressive even as Elise Galvin's proposed bill, because of the back end piece of PFD cuts that you have to use to close the remainder of the deficit. Not as regressive, certainly not as the governor's proposed sales tax is certainly not as regressive as the combination of the education head tax that Giesel's talked about. And the back end of having to use PFD cuts to raise the remainder of it. They're getting people to focus on sort of this veneer, if I can use that phrase, this veneer of progressivity, like Elise Galvin's bill or Giesel's less regressive than the governor's proposed. They're getting people to focus on this veneer without looking beyond the veneer and saying, wait, that only raises $300 million. We've got a $1.5 million deficit. How the hell is she going to raise the other 1.2 without asking that question? Right. And then applying that remaining 1.2 to the 300 million and seeing what the regressivity is of that.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Final thoughts on number 2, Brad?
Well, it's a continuation. This may be the theme today. It's a continuation of performative legislating as opposed to solid, serious legislating. They're trying to make headlines with these claims. Wielechowski, in the case of the 17% gross production tax, and Elise Galvin with the claim of I'm only going to focus on higher income Alaska families. They're trying to it's performative in the sense they're trying to grab headlines, but it's not serious in the sense that they're trying to actually solve problems.
Virtue signaling, kabuki theater, performative, whatever you want to call it. It's to grab headlines and give them something to point back to when the election season kicks off here right after this session's over. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We continue. Number 3 of the weekly top 3 is dead ahead right now.
Tune in Friday for our weekend entertainment and movie streaming review with our guest critic, Willie Waffle. That's actually his real name. Really? That's his real name? Man, his parents must have hated him. The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, break time right now. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Barbara says, our resident economist, every tax in the end is regressive. The rich can always maneuver their life to escape taxes. The poor can always lobby. The working middle class ultimately bears the burden one way or the other. I had a surprise visit yesterday from Jonathan Christ Tompkins. He showed up here at the studio, and we had a brief discussion. And this is one of the things that we talked about, was that what's going on in the legislature right now, the behavior, the disconnect from the private economy and everything else, is showing exactly this, right, Brad? On the one side, you've got the poor who are dependent on the social safety net, the welfare net. On the other side, you've got the rich and the crony capitalists who are building their entire business models around government spend. And so both sides are demanding, both sides of this spectrum are demanding and shouting for more spending, no matter what, don't cut my spending. And it's those in the middle that continue to feel the squeeze. And that's why it's average middle income working age families who are leaving because they just can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, but it's all relative, Michael. I mean, Barbara may be right, or I'm not sure I agree fully with what she said, but she may be right. But it's all relative. We got a $1.5 billion deficit. The governor tried to close that. The governor in 2019 tried to close whatever the deficit was at that time through cuts. Didn't happen, not going to happen. He hasn't tried it again. No appetite in the legislature to support those level of cuts. We got to deal with that $1.5 billion deficit. So the question is, what's the best way? I mean, there's no perfect answer. There's no painless answer, but what's the best way to deal with it? So it's all relative. And so, the PFD cuts are the worst for middle and lower income Alaska families, worst for middle income Alaska families of all the alternatives. You know that sales taxes aren't perfect, but they're a heck of a lot better than PFD cuts. You know that a progressive income tax of the type proposed by Elise Galvin is just a thin veneer on top of deep PFD cuts. So it's worse for middle income Alaska families. You've got to focus on the relativity, the relative impacts of these various bills. None of them are going to be painless. None of them are going to be painless because we had a $1.5 billion deficit that there's no appetite to close through cuts, through spending cuts. So none of the solutions are going to be painless. It's the relativity of those solutions, and finding the one that's best for middle income Alaska families is the best outcome for the state. I mean, if it's best for middle income families, it's going to be best for lower income Alaska families also. I mean, that's just the way the economics of it work. So you got to find the one that takes the least out of middle income Alaska families, and it's a relative calculation. What Elise Galvin's trying to do is trying to blow smoke at people and saying, "Oh, I'm only going to tax the rich." And so I'm the best, clearly, because I'm the best for middle income families because I'm only going to tax the rich. Well, no, you're not. You're only raising 20% of the deficit. You got to close the remainder of the deficit. And what's your way to close the remainder of the deficit? PFD cuts. And when you layer on PFD cuts to this thin veneer you've got of income tax, what's the effect? Certainly worse than PFD cuts overall, and worse than a sales tax. I mean, so you've got to do the full economics. You got to do the full analysis on all of this stuff, and then it's all relative. You got to figure out which is the best or which is the worst, depending upon what your starting point is among the relative options.
It's frustrating again to watch all this go on, especially when we know that this problem doesn't get any better. right, Brad? I mean, we've seen the projections. We know what the 10-year forecasts look like. It just doesn't get any better. And we're about to have an election year, and all of these yahoos are going to be running for re-election. And again, a lot of these people were there that helped you create the problem, right? And now they're supposedly going to solve it, and they're going to tell you in their election campaigns that, oh, I'm the guy to solve all this issue. But they won't even address it right now when it's time to when the rubber's going to meet the road.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to unserious legislators, we have unserious candidates who are talking about, solutions, going back to Governor Dunleavy's 2018 pledge of I'm going to cut our way out of this problem. Well, no, you're not. We know you're not. We know the legislature won't go along with that. You may try, but it's not going to happen. We need to look for serious candidates who are talking about full solutions, not like Elise Galvin with a 30% only approaching 20% of the problem. We need to look for candidates who are talking about full solutions, and full solutions involve some revenues. And they need to be talking about what the least harmful revenue approach is.
Well, full revenues and oil industry, tax changes, right. Solidifying the PFD, cutting some government. I mean, there's the solution is all encompassing, just like we've been talking about. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. We got more coming up. Let's get to it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Let's go.
Today's recipe is the important Alaskan news of the day with a dash of sardonic smile, a pinch of eye twinkle, not that you can see that on the radio, and a touch of acidity. It goes down easier like that. Don't question our recipes. The Michael Duke Show.
That's right. Don't question our recipes. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is our guest. The weekly top 3 continues on to the final of this week's top 3, number 3. And the question is, how much do some of the legislators hate the PFD? Well, I mean, let me preface what Brad is about to say with, we just watched that Commonwealth North presentation with Giesel and former Senator von Imhoff, and I would argue that they are basically saying the quiet part out loud that a lot of legislators are saying, which was basically, look at all the things we could spend this $685 million on that we wasted on the PFD. Look at all these things that we could spend on the Medicaid, the Medicare, the tourism, the homelessness, the policing, just fill in the blank, all the things that they could spend. Boy, there's a lot of them that just hate that money leaving their fingertips, Brad.
One of the things that the most recent ICER analysis does that's different from the 2016 ICER analysis is it looks in detail and with some new tools and using some new approaches, looks at the level of contribution that would come from non-residents under various revenue approaches. The old ICER analysis, the 2016 ICER analysis, sort of looked at that briefly and found that there wasn't much difference, frankly, in the level that Alaskans would pay, the share that Alaskans would pay under any of the various revenue options. They would pay the most under PFD cuts, but only slightly more than they would pay under sales taxes or income taxes or any of the other approaches. The burden on Alaskans didn't shift much between the various revenue options. The 2026 study takes a much deeper look at that and comes to much different conclusions, and concludes that there would be a significant difference on Alaskans on the share of the overall revenue burden that Alaskans share or bear under various alternatives. So, for example, under PFD cuts, Alaskans bear 86% using PFD cuts. Alaskans bear 86% of the cost of any revenue raised through PFD cuts. The remainder of it is borne by reduced federal income taxes. But Alaskans would bear 86% of the cost of any dollar revenue raised through PFD cuts. But then they go through an array of other options, and they get down to 2 options where Alaskans only bear 68 or in one and 70% significantly less than the share of the cost that Alaskans are bearing under PFD cuts. One is seasonal sales tax, which will shift a bunch of the costs to tourists that come in the summer, with more exclusions. That is, more exclusions for groceries and food and healthcare and those sorts of things. That would reduce the share of costs that Alaskans bear down to 68% compared to the 86% that they bear under PFD cuts. And an income tax, a flat income tax with a PFD credit, that is, you're able to use your PFD as payment toward the flat income tax that would be owed under the state. That reduces the share of the burden that Alaskans would bear of raising $1 of revenue down to 70% compared to the 83 or the 86% that we're bearing for PFD costs. It would reduce Alaskans' share of the burden down to 70%. Someone else would bear 30% of the burden of raising that $1 of revenue using that approach. So there are huge differences, significant differences in the impact on Alaskans in terms of the dollars taken from Alaskans' pockets compared to non-Alaskans, and in terms of the impact on the overall economy in terms of the share that's being taken out of Alaskans' pockets and taken as opposed to being taken out of others' pockets. There's huge differences in the various alternatives. I wrote a column on that. My Friday column last week ended up being on that because I'd gotten a lot of comments about the fact that using the old ICER analysis that there wasn't that much difference. I got a lot of comments about that, so I wrote last Friday's column on an analysis of that issue. How much more Alaskans are able, how much Alaskans are able to reduce the impact of them of a revenue approach by these various alternatives. I have a couple of trolls that show up regularly, weekly, on my column in the comments section on my column, complaining about this, that, or the other thing. I'm confident that if I said the sky was blue or the sun was yellow, that these trolls would write negative comments about that. But what really shocked me was the comments that I got on this column that said, "Oh no, we can't have we've got to use PFD cuts because that's the fairest way, regardless of what the impact is on Alaska families, regardless of what the impact is on the Alaska economy. That PFD cuts is the only fair way to raise revenue. That we've got to cut the PFD, even though Alaskans, the overall Alaska economy would be better off by shoving a bunch of the burden to others, to non-residents and others, even though Alaska would be hugely better off using one of those other alternatives, and Alaska families would be hugely better off because it would lower the take from Alaska families by using one of these other methods to raise revenues. Even though Alaskans would be better off, they still argued that it had to be done through PFD cuts for various reasons. Oh, it's free money, and we got to take free money out of people's pockets first. So we've got people out there in the state who hate PFDs so much that they overlook alternatives that are better for the overall Alaska, hugely better, 20% better, hugely better for the overall Alaska economy and Alaska families. They look past those alternatives because we've got to do it through PFD cuts. It is self-defeating. It is inflicting a wound on the Alaska economy at a time that we really can't afford it. It's inflicting a wound on Alaska families, all Alaska families, because even the upper income Alaska families would benefit from offloading a significant share of the burden to non-residents, and others would benefit from reducing the burden on the Alaska economy and on Alaska families. Even upper income residents would benefit from that. But oh no, we can't have any of that. We can't reduce the burden on Alaskans because we've got to cut PFD cuts first, no matter what. And it's just the hatred for the PFD is just so all-consuming for some people that it's shocking to me. I mean, the starting point for me for any analysis ought to be, what's best for Alaska families and what's best for the overall Alaska economy, period. Let's figure out what the best option is for those two, and let's build on that. These guys, others, start from the option of, oh no, we can't have PFDs. We got to take that free money first, and then maybe we'll look at other things. But we got to take that free money first.
Well, and how much of that, Brad, is due to the fact that, again, we're completely disconnected. The economies, the public and the private economies are completely disconnected so that they don't care. And secondly, they don't want to upset the apple cart because right now they're getting all that free money pretty easily. And if they did turn to something like this seasonal sales tax or something else, people might start paying attention to what's going on in the size and scope of government, and they don't want that level of scrutiny. That's why they hate the PFD. It's not necessarily because they hate it per se. It's because it's their money. They get a chance to spend it. Alaskans have kind of capitulated on it, so there's really no pushback. But if they did something else, people might start paying attention.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, Michael. But I think it's also we've got this mantra about free money has become so ingrained in some people that they're just going to do anything to wipe out that free money. We got to take the free money first. What they don't understand, or if they do, they choose to ignore it, is that upper income Alaska families, oil companies, non-residents are benefiting from free money also. If we didn't have the share of the permanent fund earnings that's being diverted to covering the cost of government, we'd have taxes for that share of the cost of government. So this free money, they're benefiting from the free money also. What right. Hammond did with the PFD was say 50% of that, 50% of the people in terms of permanent fund dividend. They just want more and more of the free money for themselves by cutting PFDs and converting it over to using it as this tax shield for taxes that they would otherwise pay. It is what amazes me about this is people don't focus on the impact on the overall Alaska economy of what the revenue raising measure is that we're using. They don't focus on the impact on Alaska families. They don't focus on the impact on middle income Alaska families and say, look, let's do what's best for Alaska families. Let's do what's best for the Alaska economy. Start from that premise. They start from a different premise, which is let's take away that free money first.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you make a valid point when you're arguing that they are benefiting from that free money. The upper and lower incomes are benefiting because they're reaping the benefit of government spend without having come out of their pocket for it. And I think that's a good way to look at it as well. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. Brad, thanks so much for bringing it to us and coming on board today.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we got more coming up. Hour 2 is dead ahead. Bernadette Wilson will be our guest. We'll return right after this. Barbara, I think she synopsizes what we were just saying there. She said the PFD ensures the money is distributed based on population and not the political clout of particular politicians. Politicians who seek to end the PFD are seeking to pork barrel money for their district or industry or for their donator class. I would add that to the end of that, but I think that's pretty close, Brad.
Yeah, that's certainly the motivation of a lot of legislators and others, which is Scott Kendall expresses this every once in a while. We've got to use the PFD because otherwise we wouldn't be able to. We've got to use PFD cuts to fund government because otherwise we wouldn't be able to raise enough money. If we had to use taxes, other forms of taxes, we wouldn't be able to raise enough money to fund the government, all this government spending that we want to do. So we got to use PFD cuts because that largely affects only middle and lower income Alaska families. They don't have a significant voice in the process, and we can just keep taking money from them, as opposed to these other revenue measures where we would have to take money from upper income and from oil companies and from others as well who might push back on the spending. I mean, that is the motivation of many of them. But the thing that just shocks me is people who ought to be concerned most about the overall Alaska economy, about how much money Alaska is keeping inside the state and keeping in the pockets of Alaska families, and those who ought to be concerned about the impact of these revenue measures on Alaska families, those who ought to be, that's the core thing that we ought to be concerned about, not much not how much government is spending, or not how much how silently or how stealthily you can get money over to government. We ought to be concerned about the impact on Alaska's the overall Alaska economy and Alaska families. People who ought to be concerned about that aren't. They say they are, but when push comes to shove, when you have the numbers in front of you that show that all these alternatives are better than using PFD cuts, they just ignore it and wish it away.
And again, because it's the easy road. It's the easy road. It's the easy money, and they don't want to rock the boat. And again, they don't want people to be activated. And if there was some other form of taxation that caused people to have more skin in the game, they might start paying attention to what the size and scope of government is, and they might be a little upset about it. And they definitely don't want to rock the boat in that regard.
Yep. It's easiest for them to take it this way. I agree with that. But you know, we're just starting at the wrong end. We're starting at the wrong end of the analysis. Starting point for the analysis, Oz, it should be what's best for Alaska families and what's best for the overall Alaska economy, and let's go from there.
But Brad, that's presupposing that they care about what's going on in the private economy, right? As long as the government economy is protected and that's the thing. You're right, 100%. I agree. But all those yahoos out there, they don't really care what happens in the private economy, because there's no benefit to them on it, because there's no revenue base on it from them. So it could wither and die. As long as the service economy is there to provide services to the government, it's all good.
Yeah, well, that's a prescription for death of a state. I mean, we're seeing it in the outmigration of the middle income brackets. Yeah, we're seeing the income, the effect of not caring about their economics, other than what can government spend on it? What more can we spend to, make those people stay? We're seeing the effect of it. People leave. People vote with their feet. They leave. Yeah. They don't come. We end up with 26% of the workforce coming from outside, as opposed to being able to fill it with people in the state.
What are you watching this next week, Brad? What are you going to be paying attention to this week here?
Oh, I'm going to be interested with what Senate Finance does with the Senate Resources referral of the oil tax bill, or what's now become the oil tax bill. Are they going to take it seriously? Are they going to do the hard work, or are they just going to blow it off? Will Wielechowski have essentially killed it by the huge overreach that Senate Resources made, and Senate Finance, and not doing the work that Senate Resources should have done? Will Senate Finance blow that off? And then, we're starting to get into the decisions that House Finance is going to make on the level of spending in the operating budget and various other things. So that'll be just the next step in the process, is going to be what I'm going to be interested in.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. That does it for us today. You can find him at ak4sb.com, or his weekly column every week in the Alaska Landmine. I'll post that article up from last Friday again, so you can go back and look at the ICER analysis on that for yourself. All right, Brad, thanks so much for coming on board. Appreciate you, my friend. Thank you.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, good to see you as well. I see that Bernadette is in the green room now. She was there. She's there a second ago. She's probably getting everything ready. We'll test her audio here in just a second. As soon as she comes back on, we'll test her audio, make sure that we are good to go. What else have you guys? Let's see. Bernadette is there. Let's bring her on board and make sure that we're all golden here this morning. Good morning there. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. We're ready to rock and roll. You ready to do this thing?
We are ready to do it. Good to be with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right. I'm going to park you back in the green room. Don't eat all my donuts. Okay. We'll be back. All my virtual donuts in there. Although they don't have any calories in them because they're virtual. Just don't eat all the sprinkled ones. All right. We are about ready to get back into this and get things ready to go. Yeah, thank you, Brad. We appreciate that, says Brian. Please like and share, like and follow, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, you ring the bell, you do all that stuff. If you're on Facebook, you just like and share and follow the show page. Do all that stuff. We appreciate you guys. Let's get to it. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Bernadette Wilson, our guest, up next. Here we go.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That'll just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com, where you'll find links to the audio-only live stream, the podcast, social media sites, and more, and also broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on plain old terrestrial radio on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. Welcome back to the program. Hour 2 of the big radio show today. We got a big show lined up for you today, but before we get into it, quick weather warning. Again, winter storm warning continues for Fairbanks. Where you guys are listening up there, an additional accumulation of up to 6 inches today, going all throughout the day until 6 a.m. tomorrow. Travel could be very difficult. Plus, they've got winds strengthening in Fairbanks as well. So blowing snow and winds. It's so much that the winter storm has shut down the Fairbanks North Star Borough. The borough has suspended all borough services today, including the Max Transit bus service, the Van Trans, all the park and rec facilities like the pools and the ice rinks are closed. The borough libraries are closed. All the borough libraries and the schools have been canceled yet again today. So just FYI, if you're keeping track, that's what's going on. Now, if you live down on the peninsula, there is a high wind warning for the Seward area. Winds 30 to 50, gusts up to 65. A few isolated areas, gusts up to 75 miles per hour possible. Wind chills causing it to drop to 25 below. There's an extreme cold watch for Wednesday through Thursday. Loose debris, damage to property, possible power outages, all kinds of happy stuff out there with this high wind warning in the Seward area. So just FYI, pay attention to that as we go through. All right, so that's the local stuff we need to get to. Normally in this hour, I recap what we talked about with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and then follow it up with Chris Story. But today we've got a special guest joining us in the studio this morning, or via studio, is candidate for governor, one of the, what is it, 17, 18, 30? I don't know how many people are in there now. But Bernadette Wilson joins us this morning to talk about the state of the state. She joins us right now. Good morning, young lady. How are you?
Good morning. Good to be with you. That's quite the weather report going on across the state. Everyone, we've got about a month left and then we're in the clear.
I know. I was like, we were so cowed because it's been so beautiful down here. And I thought, oh, it must be spring. And then I thought, no, you idiot. It's not spring. That's fall spring. Just wait for it. So we'll see. I don't know. It is 32 degrees here, so I'm feeling pretty good about it. But the rest of the state, oof, man, suffering.
Well, and the daylight is noticeable now, which is always very encouraging.
Yeah, well, that's true. The gain in daylight is definitely a plus. All right, well, Bernadette, let's get down into it here. It's been a hot minute since we had you on the program, and there's been a lot of things that are going on around the state. First and foremost, give me an update on how the campaign has been going throughout the state before we get down into the nitty-gritty details, which we are going to get down into. But tell me a bit about the campaign around the state. What's the response been? What's going on? Give us some deets here.
Yeah, it's been busy. It's been exciting. I think that you can feel a lot of energy and momentum. We have been crisscrossing this state, as you know, like crazy. I was just up in Fairbanks. We were in Juneau the week before that. We were in Soldotna right before the Kenai area, right before we were there in Juneau. And so we've been all over. We've got a packed calendar coming up. It's incredible to look at the calendar for the next 2 months and see just day after day, your schedule completely booked up. But it's been really exciting. We have had groups of people showing up at early morning coffee events that we've been doing, on Saturday mornings at 8 and 9 a.m. The other day, we did a late night event that didn't even start until 8 o'clock at night. We went from 8 till 10 p.m. And I was surprised at all of the people who showed up. And honestly, Michael, a lot of new people showing up, which is also very encouraging. I'm having a lot of people come up to me and tell me, Bernadette, I've only donated to one other political candidate in my life, and that was Donald Trump. And now I'm donating to you. A lot of young energy. So we're seeing that kind of that 25 to 35-year-old age group is reaching out and getting really active with us. And so whether it's been coffee shops or restaurants, we've been meeting with people I joked even in dive bars, which is where we were. We had a meeting in McDonald's when I was up in Fairbanks on a trip. And so it's been really exciting to see the energy and the momentum of Alaskans, and honestly encouraged that they're not giving up. They're ready to sit here and fight and put in the hard work. And so it's very encouraging. I tell everyone I'll sleep when I'm dead. So it's very good. We've been incredibly blessed, an incredibly high amount of individual donors on this last report. We're very proud of ourselves on how we did on this last financial report. There was another poll that came out yesterday. So there's 4 independent polls now that show that we're leading this GOP primary. So we're very encouraged by that. Of course, our social media, I'll give a shameless plug for our social media. If someone is not following us on Facebook, you definitely want to follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, Truth Social. We're on all of them, and we're putting up videos every single day on, where we stand, where I stand on policy issues, solutions to the problems, events that we have going on, all of those different things. And so really encourage people to stay in touch with us there, because there's a lot of really good information that's up.
Right. It's this is about to get to be the busy season, and of course with all the candidates, and like I said, I think now there's 17 or 18, 7. Anyway, there's a lot of candidates out there. Bernadette was
but not campaigns, and there's a very distinct difference. So
That's true. I was just going to say, and Bernadette was the early bird that got the worm. She was first out of the gate. So, I mean, you've really been hitting this hard for quite a while. What separates you the most from not just all the candidates, but from the campaigns, for those in your own party especially? What separates Bernadette out from the rest of the names that we may recognize from politics here locally, especially on the conservative side of the schedule? What separates you out there?
The biggest thing is I think only one of 2 out of the leading candidates that's never taken a check from government. I come at this completely from the private sector side. I come at this completely from outside government, and I've signed the front of a paycheck. So I own a business. You look at the job, I would argue that Donald Trump has done a phenomenal job for Alaska. In fact, I would tell you, I think he's been probably one of the best presidents that Alaska has ever had. You look at the job that Congressman Nick Begich is doing. And, Michael, I'm completely biased because I served as senior advisor on his second campaign. And everywhere I go across the state, people say to me, Bernadette, your great uncle Wally was one of the greatest governors Alaska ever had. He was an incredible visionary. And the interesting thing is what those 3 men all have in common is that they came from outside government. They had never served in a lower level of government. They came in, so-called inexperienced, and I use that term lightly. And they had also signed the front of a paycheck. And so I share those things in common with those three men. And I'm the only one in this race that shares those three things in common. So if you had to identify one big thing, that's definitely it. You know, I was born and raised here in Alaska. I was born in Kenai. I grew up in Anchorage. I've raised my three children here. My grandmother was born in the village of Naknek. And so that's another big differentiator in this race is I have some incredibly deep roots in this state. I've been all over this state my whole life. And so if you have to narrow it down, there's a couple of them anyhow.
Well, and I think that's a valid response because for the most part, you're right. I think the only other one that's ever had to make a paycheck out there was or sign a paycheck was probably Matt Hilo. But you know, again, you're right. The rest of them are for the names that we've all heard about, machinations, you know, workers, people who have been in government. And I think sometimes a fresh perspective is needed, and I welcome that as well. Let's talk about the biggest issues facing the state. We got about 5 minutes here before we hit the break, so I want to. This is a campaign question that I know has been asked of many candidates, and I was pretty critical during one of the in reading about one of these big candidate forums. The way this question was asked and the way it was answered. But what do you think is the number one issue facing the state of Alaska for, you know, not just now, but the next 5 years, the next 10 years? What is the biggest issue in your mind as you look at what's going on in the state?
Oh, hands down, it's the lack of leadership. We can look at all of the different issues facing Alaska right now, Michael, and you can go through to me and you can tell me that, you know, we're 48th, we're 49th, we're 51st in 4th and 8th grade reading and math. You can go through and we can talk about the fact that the state hasn't built a major road in 40 years, that we've studied projects until we've studied them for so long that the information is old and we got to go back and we got to study them again. All this conversation about the budget and, you know, it's time for a sales tax and it's time for an income tax. And oh my gosh, the permanent fund is going away. And by the way, we're going to limit, you know, the number of halibut that you can catch if you're a resident in Alaska. It's only going to be one. We can talk about how the legislature has fought the governor. All of those things. I don't care how great your solution is. I don't care if you have all the answers. The reason that we have every single one of those problems is because there has been a severe lack of leadership in this state. Every single problem that everyone can go through and tell me, no, the biggest concern is education. The biggest concern is the budget. All of it very clearly points back to a lack of leadership. We have got to get solid leadership, solid vision, and solid communication going in this state, because at the very root of all of those, election integrity, we could talk about a grand jury report. I mean, you know as well as I do, there is a list that is a mile long. And I would argue that at the very heart of it, we have got to have someone who is willing to lead, who's willing to take risks, and who's willing to make the tough decisions and not worry about what am I going to go do next? What is my next job? Am I going to be able to run for higher office? Am I going to be able to land the lobbying job? Whatever it might be. We've seen individuals come in and get almost very cautious because they're worried, where am I going to go next? I know where I'm going next. I'm going to go back to garbage. That's where I'm headed back to. I grew up in dirt. I own a garbage company. I figure dirt, trash, I'm well qualified for politics, and I know exactly what I'm going to go back to.
Right. I mean, I can see your point as far as, you know, leadership. We have had a severe lack of leadership, both in the mansion, the governor's mansion, and in the legislature, quite honestly, in true leadership as far as people who are willing to be the adult in the room. My argument would be, though, that at some point, all roads in this state lead back to the budget, right? Lead back to this, what we're doing as far as how much we're spending, how much we're taking in, what's going on. That's the crisis point for us right now. And if we bring your leadership in, which is, you're saying that is to you the number one thing is the lack of leadership. What is going to be your position on on fixing this budget and this fiscal problem, because we're facing a fiscal cliff, right? I mean, we've got a legislature right now that's fighting over putting $500 million in a supplemental budget. Half of this stuff doesn't even, it's all forward funding instead of actual, paying for things that have already taken place. I mean, that's just indicative of this whole problem with the budget. I would argue that the number one problem, I guess I could say after leadership, although I would say that the main problem, no matter who you are, is that budget, because all roads lead to and from there. What's your position? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is, with all due respect, I'm going to disagree with you. I think that beyond leadership, the next biggest issue that this state is facing comes down to election integrity. We have inflated voter rolls at 106, 108%. We wait weeks to get election results. You have some areas of the state that can't vote in person because no precinct leaders show up. You've got election materials get left on the side of on the side of the road with completed ballots in them, to the point that Department of Justice had to come in and audit the state of Alaska. So here's the thing. Take the best candidate in the world that can give you every answer that you possibly want on your budget. Give it to them. Give them all the solutions. If the very core of your republic is the right to a transparent, timely, and fair election, and we don't have that, I would argue that that is your next biggest crisis. Because we can debate all day on all these other issues, we can have all these solutions, but the very foundation of our republic in this state is incredibly threatened. So that's the first thing. Now, to answer your question about the budget, once you get those elections cleaned up, which is why, having Senator Mike Shower on this ticket is so incredibly important. But when it comes to the budget, you're not going to be able to do any one thing. That is as you know better than anyone, that is an incredibly loaded question. So first of all, we need to look for efficiencies in state government. Where can we make cuts? We spend 4 times more on state government than the state of Florida. We are consistently one of the highest. We spend more per person on our budget than anywhere else in the country. So we know that we have an incredibly high burn rate. I would argue that we need to come in and we need to audit for dollars and cents, and we need to figure out where we can find efficiencies. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need to come in and we need to audit bureaucracy itself. We need to come through and do a FOIA request on all of our own emails to find out not just where the fat is and the dollars and cents, but where can we find efficiencies? Where are departments not working, or where have they shown almost what I would argue is a flippant attitude towards the amount of money that they're spending? I think that we need to change the way that we budget. We need to look at taking have a conversation about zero-based budgeting. We need to look at taking a 5-year rolling average. When you have departments that have a use it or lose it mentality, I would argue that the way that you budget is fundamentally flawed. When you have departments, I'm going to give the example of Department of Transportation. When you have Department of Transportation that comes out and, you've seen the road graders out in the spring and their sparks flying up, or they're throwing down sand because they're worried that if they don't burn through that next year, God forbid, we get an extra 30 feet of snow. Now they're not going to have the money for it. You're putting these departments and you're giving them false choices, the false choice of either burn the money or you're not going to get it next year. So I think that process is very flawed, also in the way that we budget. And so that's another component as we're having this budget conversation. We need to talk about a spending cap, a realistic spending cap. The legislature can give the governor and appropriate whatever budget they want, but ultimately the governor has every right to go back to those department heads and say, hey, to their commissioners and to their department heads and say, you know what? Yes, I know that the legislature gave you $100, but we're only going to spend $50 and we're going to figure it out. I am not opposed at all to going to department heads and trying to figure out a program that incentivizes them to try to find efficiencies in government. I mean, when you look at this budget, you have, 300 unfilled, fully funded positions, and many of them have been sitting there for more than 10 years. You have Department of Health spent money, sponsored an LGBT doula class. That's what we're spending money on. I mean, how bizarre is that?
Right.
We spent money on a suicide prevention symposium where we had a self-proclaimed bearded drag queen talking to 13-year-olds. Does anybody really think that we have really and truly come through and are spending money as efficiently as we can? I would argue that we haven't. I think that we need to look at the way that we manage our permanent fund, which is also part of the budget conversation. Yes, it was great. The permanent fund hit a record $85 billion this past fall, but it still is operating at a fraction of the S&P. We are spending more than $1 billion on asset managers to manage that permanent fund. We've got state corporations that spend, $1 billion at least, I would argue, picking winners and losers. And so there is a lot there to unpack for sure.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely not a soundbite moment where you can just arbitrarily, say, wave your magic wand and say one thing is going to fix it. And I think everything that you've outlined there is a good start. And I think that's just what it is, a good start. It needs to be a holistic approach to this. We're going to continue. Bernadette Wilson is our guest. We're up against the break. We continue. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll return with more right after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the break right now. I think Bernadette has stepped away for a second here. We'll ask her questions when she gets back here. I'm making some making some notes about some of the questions here in the chat room. Let's see. Okay. All right. I see some of your questions here. We'll be asking her some of these questions as we go through when she comes back here. Please do me a favor, like and share, follow the show page, do all that kind of stuff. We'll get her back here. Naresh says, we've tried to clean up elections for years. The problem is DOE, Division of Elections, who's reluctant to change and rules by policy that they then come up with based on statutes. They have fought us all the way on this. So yes, 100% agree. Clean up elections. He says, by the way, I'm trying. Over 63% of the general fund is state personnel services. Yes, the state is a job center when it was to be state services. The issue, in his opinion, is not that we don't have money, but the total mismanagement of those funds. And again, I think there's a huge component of that as well. Bernadette, back with us here now. Let me ask a couple questions. Kim says, I think I know, but what does the 13 stand for on your hat? Is that the governor? Yeah.
Yes. So we will be the 13th administration. So I'll be the 13th governor.
Okay, right. That's what I thought.
And you can get these, by the way, on our website, BernadetteForGovernor.com. We've got the 13 hats. So.
Okay, you have more than 13 of them, but you've got the 13 hats. We've
got the 13 hats. There's definitely plenty more than 13 already floating all over the state.
Cindy says, don't underestimate her. She's okay with being a one-time governor to right the state. And you and I have talked about this, that's important to be able to have the integrity and to have the courage to do the things that are hard that may not get you reelected, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that's why I highlight, I think that it's important when you look at, what is the difference? I think that when you just kind of naturally, when you take someone who has taken a check from government and has been dependent upon that check for government for however many years, right? I mean, there's people in this race that have been dependent upon checks in government for more than 10 years. When you take someone like that, I think it naturally makes you a little more risk adverse because you're worried about, what am I going to do? I don't know what comes next. And when you take someone who is not dependent upon government, hasn't taken a check from government ever, knows exactly what they're going to go back to, I think that can actually emboldens you a little bit. I know that it's emboldened me even out on the campaign trail with just hey, I'm going to call it like I see it. We're going to call a spade a spade. It is what it is. I'm not trying to impress any lobbyist from any particular industry. And, trust me, they've all reached out on different issues and tried to have their influence over one thing or another. And, the comment has been made to me, Bernadette, there's some frustration among some of the industries and their lobbyists feeling like they can't influence you. Well, quite frankly, maybe that's time for what we need. We have taken the last several years and we have been told over and over again, well, we just all got to get along with each other. We got to we got to work together. We just got to do this and do that. And my response to that is we tried that way. It has failed us. We have tried saying that we don't like career bureaucrats and then asking for their 50-page resume. It's failed us. We've tried the whole go along to get along. It's failed us. But what history shows us, both past and present, is that the ones who can deliver, the ones who can get done what they said they were going to get done, the ones that come in and say, you know what, this is just the direction we're going, are indeed the ones that had no government experience beforehand. I mean, you can go back, Michael, to even our greatest documents in this country, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, were written by people who came from outside government and had nothing to lose.
Well, it's because they believed in the citizen legislator. That's what they believed in, not the professional. But there was no such thing as a professional politician unless you were in the nobility and a member of parliament. That's what they were fighting against back then. All right. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're 10 seconds out. So we're going to rejoin here. And that's what the little timer is here. We're going to jump back into it here, get things rolling. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Please like and share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's get to it. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay, we're continuing now. Bernadette Wilson is our guest candidate for governor, running on the Republican ticket in the open juggle primary. We're continuing with her now, and she touched on something that I want to circle back to real quick, which I think is it's impressive that she's the first candidate that's ever actually brought it up on her own, and that is this discussion on the permanent fund dividend. The permanent fund is the golden goose that's basically supporting the state right now. I mean, it used to be oil was the lion's share, and this year it's 18% of the overall take is oil. So oil is dwindling. Most of it's come from the permanent fund, and then a big chunk from the permanent fund dividend. But you mentioned the fact that here we are, the permanent fund not even keeping up with the Vanguard, S&P 500, anything else. We're getting returns. Brad Keithley dropped a slide from one of their own presentations, the permanent fund's own presentations, to show that their 10-year average is a 4.8% return. And now they're talking about wanting to combine the funds and have a solid 5% draw from now until perpetuity. But they're only getting a 4.8% return. And of course, it's costing us $1 billion, nearly $1 billion a year in fees to do that. What's your thoughts here, Bernadette, as you look at this, the makeup of the board, the policies, how we should be doing this? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, absolutely. So 2 things first, really quickly, someone said in your comments that the Iron Dog gets money from the state of Alaska. I don't think that's accurate. If it is, I would love for someone to drop that in there. I do know that the state of Alaska gives money to the Iditarod. And I also want to correct someone. They said Bill Walker is a business person. He was an attorney. Attorneys tend to not be risk takers. And of course, he most recently had been an attorney for the city of Valdez. So anyhow, you're asking about the permanent fund. Of course, we're spending more than $1 billion on asset managers to manage that permanent fund dividend. And when you look at that permanent fund, I was very surprised when someone read through me the resumes of the individuals that sit on the board for the permanent fund who are making some of those decisions, and surprised that one of them had actual investment experience. And so when you look at the permanent fund, not only are we spending this exorbitant amount of money to manage it, but I've made the comment, we're managing it as though it's lemonade stand money. I don't know any other comparison. You look across the country and people are very envious of the fact that the state of Alaska has this very large fund that I think, and clearly, if you look at the SMP, shows us that it could be operating and producing much better for the state of Alaska if we manage those investments a little bit better. And so I think that that's incredibly important. Obviously, a big conversation around the permanent fund, and I want to make sure that, we're on the record on this. But when you look at the amount of money that the permanent fund has, and then you look at the state legislature that's saying, well, we're not going to pay this out. We can't afford to pay it out. First of all, they absolutely can afford to pay it out. They've just made the decision that they don't want to pay it out. And at the very core of the permanent fund is this idea that I think everyone has to answer. Michael, it's not a question. I know everybody wants to make it about the budget and everybody wants to make it about the amount of the check. But the reality is it's not about a $300 check or a $3,000 check. What's at the very core of the permanent fund and what we have to answer for ourselves is, who knows better how to spend money? Is it government or is it the individual? And when you take roughly, 500,000 people that are taking a permanent fund, you're talking more than $1 billion. And then, of course, when you do the economic multipliers for that, you're looking at, roughly 2 that's coming into the state economy. So we have to address that conversation of, at the very foundation, who knows better how to spend money? Is it the individual or is it government? Who owns the resources? Is it the individual or is it government? And at the get past the whether it's a $30 check, $300 or $3,000, whatever it is. If nothing else, you can't concede on that very core conservative principle. I'm not going to concede on that. And quite frankly, I don't want a governor that's going to concede on that.
Right. Well, and at the heart and core of this, what we have is 2 competing statutes. And that's the argument, is that there's 2 competing statutes. There is money in the ERA, $9-10 billion in the ERA right now that could be utilized to pay a full statutory fee at PFD, according to the original statute. But they continue to then say that this other statute, the POMV statute, is supreme in that regard, and that gives them the ability to then take that money and spend it on other things. And I think you're right, 100%, that this is about, we know better than you how to spend your money. That's the prevalent attitude, it seems to be, in Juneau from most legislators, and has been really from most governors, I think, in the last few years. As well, is that we know better than you how to spend your money. And that is the key question here. Who spends it better?
Right. It absolutely is who spends it better. And I will say this also, when you look at the same legislators that say, well, we can't afford to pay out a permanent fund, a good chunk of them will also tell you that we need to return to defined benefit. Well, a return to defined benefit comes with a price tag of roughly $7.1 billion to the state of Alaska. The same legislators that tell you we can't afford a permanent fund were pushing for an $1,800 BSA increase. So the exact same individuals who say we can't afford this are the exact same individuals who, ironically, haven't met a spending package that they don't like. And I have heard, even from other Republicans running in this governor's race, well, we can't afford the permanent fund. It's time for a sales tax. It's time for us to look at, other revenue sources. You don't have a revenue issue, you have a spending issue. But here's the thing, and I think why we have to be very cautious of individuals who have bought into that line of thinking. And that's this. If you take away the permanent fund, just give them all the permanent fund hypothetically. Give them an income tax, give them a sales tax, give them all the oil taxes. If you don't address the very heart of why the beast is hungry, it's never going to be enough. Right. And one of the things that I have found incredibly disappointing in this conversation with even other gubernatorial candidates is, well, I think it's probably time for a sales tax. I think it's probably time that we just recognize we're never getting the permanent fund back to where it goes. And what is discouraging about that is, like I said, it goes back to, we have to fight for core principles and core values. And off of those very fundamental values, from all of that should rise every other decision that we make. which is why that issue of who knows better how to spend money is incredibly important. But the other thing I'll say is this: if you have convinced any, gubernatorial candidate, regardless of party affiliation, that now is indeed the time to concede on the permanent fund, that now is indeed the time to concede on a sales tax because this is what the budget needs and all of these other things. If they will concede on that right now, then how long exactly do you think it is until that same individual says, well, it's just time now, we need to increase the sales tax to 5%. And you just don't understand. I mean, the budget. Now it's time to start that sales tax 2 weeks earlier in the year. Now it's time to extend it 2 weeks later in the year. If someone will concede right now, given the fact that the state spends an astronomical high amount of money on government, we have, like I said, we can go through all the numbers and all the stats, right? Double the national average, 4 times higher than Florida, highest rate, per person, per capita than any other state in the country. We could go through all the numbers. We've discussed these multiple times. If given all of those statistics, you have even other Republican gubernatorial candidates that are willing to concede this early and that easily, I assure you, they will concede when it comes to increasing those taxes, extending them so that they're no longer just seasonal, which, by the way, the bulk of our economic activity takes place during those 6 months, whether it's construction, tourism, fishing, anything else. So that worries me also, is that not only are we conceding on a core set of values and conservative principles, but you're also giving in pretty easily, which means that, my concern is that any of those others, God forbid they become the governor, are now going to allow themselves to become kind of, blindsided or bought into this idea that suddenly now we need to it's just 2 weeks on either end. It's just a little bit of an increase. The 2 things that the private sector needs the most, what are the 2 things that drive a private sector? It's money and it's property. So you've got the state of Alaska sitting on property between the state of Alaska and the feds. And then you've got the state of Alaska sitting on money. And now when you take the permanent fund, what exactly do you think is going to drive this private sector unless we get those things under control and we address those? That is critical in this conversation.
Bernadette Wilson is our guest. We're coming up again on the break here. We're going to continue in just a moment here with one final segment dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show continues. Don't go anywhere. Back with more in just a moment. We'll have Bernadette continue with us in one final segment, back right after this.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Bernadette is our guest here. She's going to come back here in just a second, and we're going to, there she is. We're going to continue here. Bernadette, I agree with what you've been saying on this, and my question is this, because again, I mean, we have a spending problem. I've been saying for 25 years we've had a spending problem. We've had a spending problem that's led to this revenue problem, but at its heart, it's a spending problem. So here's my question. As a governor, because the problem here has not always been the governor. It has been in part the legislature who's been basically making these decisions. And then, of course, the governor a lot of times has not. The governor had a lot of power. The governor could have vetoed and done different things. As a governor, how are you going to force the other 60 yahoos in Juneau to follow your plan of no new taxation, getting these efficiencies, doing these things? Because what we see right now, we already see legislators who are saying, look at all the things we could spend this $685 million on. Kathy Giesel at a Commonwealth North meeting saying that. Look at all the things we could spend. They are already spending what's left of the PFD. So the question won't be, do you want a PFD or do you want a tax? It is, do you want a PFD or no PFD and a tax? Because that's the direction we're going right now. So how is a governor, as strong as a governor is, how do you pull the woe back on the legislature in that regard as well?
Yeah, so there's two different components to that, two different, I think, main components, maybe three really. So the first thing is this. I hear a lot that, when it comes to the budget, but the legislature is going to set this or that. It doesn't matter. You don't need your legislature to cooperate with you when you go tell your commissioners how much they will spend and where to set their budget. And a lot of people seem to forget that in this conversation. So, if you have the state legislature that says we're going to allocate $500 to Department of Education, the governor can very well go back without the legislature. You don't need the legislature to go back to your commissioner of education and say, here's the deal. We're not going to spend $500. DOT, you're not going to spend the full $100. You're going to spend 50 of it. You're going to spend 80 of it. So the governor isn't supposed to go in above what the legislature did. Now, of course, this current governor came back and he did by $500 million. He's now asking for an emergency. I believe he's got an emergency supplemental bill because he's got $500 million more than they spent than what the legislature had appropriated. But you don't have to spend up to the amount that the legislature gave you. Nothing stops a governor from going to their commissioners and departments and saying, you're going to come in under this. So that's the first thing. And we need to be crystal clear about that. A governor is going to have to come in and be bold enough with their commissioners and with their different departments and say, here's the thing. I don't care what the legislature gave you. You're going to come in under that. Now, at the point that you do that, a few things happen. At the point that you come in and you do spend far less, you now take away some of the lobbying power that legislatures have in their ability to make the sales pitch as to why they need these other things. So you've taken away their ability to make that sales pitch. And at the point that you've taken away their ability to make that sales pitch, now I believe the second component to this is that the governor needs to set up an independent expenditure or what we would call a super PAC, not for the purposes of their own reelection. And I want to be very clear. We've had governors that have set up independent expenditure campaigns. They have taken that. They've used it for their own reelection. I think what the governor needs to do is now take those funds, which do not come from government, by the way, and let legislators know, here's the thing. We've taken away your ability to make the sales pitch on why you need these things. We're going to go into your district and we're going to have a nice, healthy, robust conversation with people in your district about the fact that you're trying to push these things or you're trying to do these things. I watch legislators all over and they freak out. And you know this very well. You go on this show and you criticize any one of them and they will have a meltdown. Someone writes an op-ed criticizing one of those legislators and they have a meltdown. So do you really think that when you have an aggressive governor that now says, I'm going to go into your district and I'm going to have a conversation with your constituents, you don't think that you'll have some amount of influence over them? I would argue that you would. I would argue that if a governor gets aggressive and takes to social media and starts putting out videos and doing radio interviews and writing op-eds and saying, you know what, I've got money, I'm going to go into your district and send out mail, especially after you have taken away their best sales pitch, absolutely, I think that it's going to be effective. I'll also say at the front of that is having good communication with your legislature. I sat on the plane coming home from Juneau to Anchorage last year. This was at the beginning of last year's session. And I asked a particular legislator who sits in leadership in the state Senate, what are we working on this year? He says to me, Bernadette, when you figure it out, you let me know. There was no communication. So you've got to have good communication. You've got to be able to lead and come in under and then spend some money.
Bernadette Wilson, our guest. Good answer. Good answer. Let's continue on here. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
That guy's so mean to me. All right, let's continue on. Bernadette Wilson is our guest. She just had a great answer. You'll have to go back and listen to it on the podcast when we get to it because I think that it's important to know. We've got to have a governor that is willing to take the slings and arrows. One of the things you mentioned, though, Bernadette, is communication. And I think that's something that the past governors have fallen down on, Walker, Dunleavy, is that they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity with a bully pulpit. They've got, Facebook Lives or Instagrams or TikTok or whatever that you want to jump into. They have an opportunity to hold a conversation with Alaskan citizens, to rally the base, so to speak, to get more people involved and not be dependent on the Fourth Estate to filter everything that they're saying through the lens of the news media and their own biases. And I think most governors have fallen apart on that. I've offered this program. It's been 5 years since I've had Governor Dunleavy on this program because he just won't come on anymore. And he said at the beginning, "Oh yeah, I'll come on every couple of months. We can talk for a little bit." And I mean, it's an opportunity. And yet governors again and again and again, as they get further away from election day, they just stop doing it. This is a crucial component of transmitting your message and your vision of what's going on and why you're doing the things you're doing. Is that what your plan is?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that you see that just in the way that we're campaigning. But the other thing, Michael, and I want to add to that, and I'm going to preface this before I say this. I'm going to preface this because I'm going to ask a favor of you, okay? Now, throughout this campaign, we have led on several different issues. We have thrown out several different solutions. We have packaged them up and talked about them. And then we have had other individuals who have sat in government forever and then suddenly decided that they loved our idea, and then they're packaging up as their own, which is great, right? I mean, it shows really and truly the power of leadership. And so that's great. So I'm going to throw one out to you. And the only request that I have is I want all of your listeners to remember that you heard this here first on this show. And when you have another campaign adopt this, Michael, I want you to make sure that you remind them, wait a minute, Bernadette said that on my show. Okay?
It sounds a lot like something Bernadette said. I mean,
That sounds a lot. So I'm going to remind everybody, because you trust me, it'll only take about a month or two, and pretty soon you'll have every gubernatorial candidate saying that this was their idea. Here's what it is. And it's not my idea. This is actually an old idea, but nobody's been talking about it. Do you know that here in the state of Alaska, roughly 40 years ago, it's been about 40 years, we, the governor, when I say we, I'm talking the governor specifically, used to give a state of the budget address. The state of the budget address used to happen before the state of the state address. So it used to happen roughly, 2 to 4 weeks before the state of the state address came out. And that was all that it was about. This is the situation that we're in. This is what we're spending. It was all the numbers and cents, just like the state of the state, but a state of the budget. The last one that I can find record of was actually from my Uncle Wally back in the early 90s. Okay. As governor, not only do I intend to make use of all of these other things and go directly to the people, but I will tell you, I intend to bring back a state of the budget address. We are going to have a conversation with Alaskans, very specifically from the governor directly to the people, that is a state of the budget address. And I want you, when you hear that from another campaign, I want you to remind people, wait a minute, that was said on my show first, okay? That's another very important component to this conversation. So I have lots of ideas. I've been very careful what ideas I drop where, knowing that not only is the strategy important, but knowing that, imitation is the highest form of flattery, and we are indeed leading this race on multiple fronts, including the conversations and the solutions. And so I want that to go on the record. We are going to bring back a state of the budget address to this state. It's incredibly important.
Right. One of the things that you mentioned, and before I'm gonna give you your head here for the final couple minutes, but before we jump into that, and I think that's a great idea, by the way, so we'll remember that. But you mentioned it earlier when you said Alaskans are only going to be allowed one halibut, and fishing game issues are a huge thing, especially when I moved down to the peninsula. These folks down here are passionate about that. I mean, I've always kind of paid attention to it, but never to the extent that the folks down here are paying attention to it. What is your policies on the fish and game issues? Do you have anything that you want to work on in that first year on top of the budget and everything else? What is your policies on fish and game that you want folks to know about?
Yes, absolutely. So I will remind people, this is a good opportunity to remind people, if you want to know our positions on, fish and game, healthcare, all of these things, right? All you got to do is go to our social media and you will find, or our YouTube channel. If you're not on social media, go to our YouTube channel. You will find a whole host of positions, a ton that we've said. Very specifically, when it comes to fishing, we've talked a lot about trawling. In fact, we were the first campaign to talk about trawling. And this is another issue. It's really fun to hear everybody kind of get on board with this, even though they've been in office before. It's like, wait a minute, you didn't bring this conversation up all those years, right? But trawling is a conversation that we have to have, that we really need to address. This issue has been out of control for decades. It was something that I used to talk about a lot when I had the TV show, the radio show. You have trawlers right now that are taking massive nets and totally dragging the bottom of the ocean floor, throwing away hundreds of millions of pounds of king salmon and halibut. They pulled up 9 dead orcas a few years back. And so we've got to get that issue under control. I think we need to have a conversation about the gear that's being used when it comes to our trawlers. We need to have a conversation about observers that are on the boats. We need to have a conversation about, if you're going to lower the limits on Alaskans, then you need to be lowering those bycatch limits at minimum, and I want to be very clear about that, by the same amount that you are on Alaskans. But when you're going to tell Alaskans, well, you can only go pull up 1 halibut, but then you take the bycatch limits for the trawling industry and you roll them over, that's not good. I've made the commitment on this campaign. I was right out of the gate back in June that I would not take any money from the trawlers, and that I intend to appoint individuals to these different boards and commissions, and a commissioner of fish and game who does not have a financial interest or a tie to the trawling industry. So that's incredibly important.
All right, Bernadette, last 2.5 minutes here. I want to give you the floor. Anything that you want to get out there or hit on that I didn't touch on? An hour goes fast sometimes, so I'll give it to you right now.
Yeah, I would just encourage people, like I say, go to our website, BernadetteForGovernor.com. Go to our YouTube channel, Bernadette for Governor. Check out all of our social media, Bernadette for Governor. You'll see a whole host of videos and different things where we have addressed all of these different issues, from, the grand jury and issues with OCS. I mean, there's so dive in and we could talk about, but what I will leave people is this. And, I understand, Michael, and this, you've been doing this a long time. There are, in this race, there are many that have come, ahead of us, behind us, many, many more that will come. And we all sit here and, they make their promises and they talk about what they can do, and on and on and on. And the reality is we're still sitting in this same situation because they have failed to follow through. And there is a healthy amount of skepticism. I share that skepticism. So what I really encourage people to do is study history, both past and present. And there is a very clear recipe as to who can deliver. And it's those that have come from outside government and know what it's like to sign the front of a paycheck. I really and truly firmly believe this next governor will have 2 years with a guaranteed Republican president to get this state on track. I know we can get this state on track. And it is my sincere hope that as people look back and, they tell stories of pipeline days and, a pipeline era gone by, our kids are going to look back and say, oh, yeah, but I was in Alaska during the golden age, right? We are going to get this state turned around. This campaign is about Alaskans. It's for Alaskans. And when I'm all done, y'all can help me go clean up the trash, back to the business. So
That's right. She can go back to trash knowing that she did a good job, which I think, again, is critical to know that you're not looking for something further down the road. All right, Bernadette, it was great to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming on board. We appreciate you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're out of time. We will see you guys tomorrow. All right, Bernadette Wilson, our guest here on the program. Yeah, I mean, I think she's saying a lot of the right things. She and I may not agree on whether or not the budget is the most important, but I think she's got a hell of a lot of good ideas. Zero-based budgeting, yes. The governor taking the pen and slashing his own departments after the budget's been passed, yes. Those are all things that can be done. Now, that's going to lead to a lot of problems. There'll be a lot of lawsuits about how the legislature said one thing, but the governor said another. That'll be interesting. But yeah, we need somebody in there that is going to make those decisions. And that state of the budget thing that's a good thing as well. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing what else she brings to the table. She's got a lot of energy. I love that. All right, my friends, we're out of time for today. We'll see you tomorrow. Delana Johnson's going to be joining us. She's going to be joining us in hour 2. Chris Story in hour 1. And we'll have some other stories from around the state as well in hour 1 before we get to Chris. And then Delana Johnson. All right. That's it for us today, my friends. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. The Michael Duke Show.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.